Hey friend, listen. I know the world is scary right now. Corruption, war, inflation, demographics, degeneracy, disease, unrest, hatred, and despair. We didn't come here to tell you how it is, but that it's going to get way better.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I need. Everything I wanted, just wait and see.
Better by Bitcoin.
Hey, welcome to the show for today. You have myself and Gilded Plebe Bondor on this fantastic Wednesday afternoon. How are you doing today, my good
Doing
sir?
good, man. Doing good. We are having a great time on the internet with regard to the core versus knots debate. So that's what we kind of wanted to jump into today.
Oh, man.
Particularly with the high level perspective on just the moral case, not the legal case, the moral case that people really are failing to jump into. Yeah, but before we get into that, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I think this has actually been weighing on me a lot too, because we've talked about this kind of since this whole thing kind of started. Because it's really interesting, right? There's a lot of really, really smart people in Bitcoin. And I definitely know I am not at the top of that pile. If there was a pile
Same.
it was a ranked order, I'm very close to the lower, probably 56th quartile of whatever. And I don't even know what that means. It's just why you can tell I'm not very high on that quotient there. But I think what's really interesting about this whole thing is it's highlighting the lack of understanding that a lot of people have when it comes to like how dangerous moral relativism is in terms of what it's going to do to your outcomes. And I think that's the thing that's really, really been missed by most, right? Like Peter Todd, super smart guy, Adam Back, super smart guy. But they are like Jameson Lopp, super smart guy, but they're missing the point, I think, just in general. And so I'm curious kind of your take on that. Like maybe set the stage for what you think is the biggest issue right now with this whole thing that people are just kind of like missing.
So, and I did a post about this, and I think the post captures it pretty well, but I'm not going to read the post. The point is that within Bitcoin and within like a cypherpunk ethos, you get a lot of like anarcho, agorist, libertarian, like we essentially a viewpoint that says the state is abject failure. We need to reject the state. I forget the guy's name, but every podcast he goes on, he's like, I just want to set the record straight. F the state, right? Like just puts it out there just every time. It's awesome. It's fantastic.
Is that Eric Kaysen? I think that sounds like
probably Eric Kaysen.
Yeah.
But there's a real problem if you reject the state, but then also hold morally relativistic views, like the idea, hey, what's good for you is good for you. It's not, I'm not here to push any kind of moral thing on you. Like whatever you want to do, that's cool with you. Like, hey, we're all libertarian, free market, like whatever, whatever's good, we're gonna, whatever. I'm not here to dictate what you do, with your free time or, what drugs you consume or whatever the thing is, right? Like there's a real problem with that, because if you have a relative moral framework, then a relative moral framework basically says it's always like everything's relative. But the problem with that statement, everything is relative, is that it's a objective statement about reality. And the objective statement is that everything's relative. Well, if everything's relative, well then isn't that statement also relative? Isn't it only relative to you and your perspective? It's not objectively true to everybody, because if it was objectively true to everybody, then you couldn't say the statement. It's a self-refuting statement. It's the same thing as there is no absolute truth, right? Only relativism matters. There's no absolute truth, except for this one statement, which is absolutely true, which is that there is no absolute truth. So it's a self-refuting statement. And this is the super high level, of course, but many people in Bitcoin, as we're just seeing in droves, many people in Bitcoin have never internalized this logical contradiction in the way that they process moral truth, and the consequences of that really make themselves evident in how they then process the debate we're experiencing now. Now, this is my perspective on this debate, and it's only one teeny sliver of this perspective, but I think it's the highest level. It's the highest level contradiction. This is the core of the problem in my view, and then all the rest of the problems kind of manifest themselves from this core problem. So does that make sense? Am I communicating that effectively?
Totally makes sense. And I think it's interesting because, like, let's take this and actually like ground it in a couple of examples, right? Like the first example I'd probably give is most Bitcoiners would probably agree that the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire was coin clipping, right? That is not a relative event. That is a objectively, an objective example of something that happened, that somebody did, that started to create moral rot. Because you just get to this place where it's like, well, the relativism comes in of like, how much do I clip? How much do I take? How much is mine? And who is stealing from me that I can steal from them? Because the relativism just starts this back and forth of like, well, you wronged me and you wronged me. So if you wronged me, I can wrong you, because then that makes it okay for me to do it because you did it. Like, that's the issue with relativism is, you get off balance very, very quickly. It's kind of like when somebody's riding a bike and they start doing this, like sooner or later, you're going to go way too far and you're just going to crash.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point, is you cannot relatively make an assumption that the amount of me shifting left quickly and shifting right even quicker is not going to have an impact on the fact that the direction I'm going is forward. Like, that's the big issue with relativism is a lot of times people have this idea that, you can be relative with your morals, but you can be concrete and objective about everything else. And it's actually the exact opposite, is you actually have to be 100% concrete with your morals, because if you don't have a mooring morally, then you're going to fall for anything and everything. And like a perfect example is what Zach, who's on the show, often was talking about in kind of this response to Zabo he did, where at the end of the day, you can look at gravity as something that you just want to look at as in a vacuum, right? And there's three ways you can respond to gravity, which is what he was saying, is you can agree with gravity and look at it as a like objective thing that there is. You can disagree with gravity and just kind of think it's relatively stupid. And then you can also have this idea of like, you can understand what it is and you can not like it. But that's really the only thing that you can do. It is like, if you ignore it, you're going to kind of run off a cliff and you're just gonna be like, well, I didn't agree with gravity. It's like, well, it's kind of there. Doesn't really matter. You can agree with it and do what SpaceX is doing and launch stuff into space, or you can kind of have this third thing of like, okay, it's there, I understand it, I don't like it, but I can just ignore it. It's like that second group of people who are just like, no, gravity is stupid, I don't think it's real, like whatever. It's like, cool, you can understand that and like look at it, but if that's the way that you are, like, you're never going to be able to do anything successfully, because you're not actually interacting with the world, with the reality, in a way that is actually going to allow you to move forward.
Yeah. So, and another thing that I think is worth mentioning with regard to this, like the mooring, as you say, is like, this is not like, this issue is not like new by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't just like, oh, in postmodernism came and found this elevated, oh, everything's relative. Like, no. This is like, this idea goes back a very long time and has been refuted over and over and over and over again. And to put that into perspective, I actually did some research on this recently, which was like, so just ancient philosophers, like, how did they encounter this idea of the moral relativistic idea, or just the relative truth idea? Okay, so we have uh,
Plato's Cave.
Aristocles, who said there is no truth. But if there's no truth, is the statement true? Well, how could that be possibly true if there is no truth, right? Truth cannot be known, which is an ancient skeptical phrase, which is, well, how can you know that? You can't prove anything. Well, how can you prove that? Nobody can know anything for certain, which I forget the guy's name, but I forget his name. Heracles, something like that. Everything changes. Heraclitus, I think that's his. But if everything changes, well, doesn't that change? Nothing is as it appears. Well, isn't that not what it appears as? I think the famous case is the Bertrand Russell, I think, put it together, which was like, I am lying, or this statement is false, right? The paradoxical, well, if this statement is true, if this statement is false, then it's true, and if it's true, then it's false, and it just goes on and on like this. So, okay, so this is a problem that's been elaborated on in philosophy ad nauseum for centuries. The most recent thing, the one that really gets me and really gets all the modern people, is when you come to Foucault and Nietzsche, where they say something like, all truth claims are really just power grabs. And you're like, aha, I knew it. All these people who say that the Bible is true, they're just trying to grab power, right? But then if it's true that all truth claims are really just power grabs, well, that's a truth claim. So how can we trust it? How do we know that Nietzsche and Foucault are not just trying to grab power according to their own statements? And then you can apply it to other things too. Like Freud was famous for going through the process of psychoanalyzing people. And he came to the conclusion that, well, all of our projections about God are really just our psychological need to deal with our guilt and shame. But if all of our projections are about God are really just our psychological need to deal with guilt and shame, well, then so is this very projection about God. So why trust it? And then the other ones are like evolution. Evolution is the other famous one, which was all of our belief forming faculties are really just our evolutionary, they're products of evolution that helped our ancestors survive. Well, if that was true, then it would also be that opinion itself would be a product of evolution. So why trust it? At the end of the day, none of these things actually describe or help inform reality in any way. They just self-undermine themselves, and they sound smart on the surface, but the second you say, why should I believe that? Because it's self-violating itself, then you expose the absurdity of it all, right? So, I mean, I could just keep going on examples, but where it applies directly is then we now have this thing called Bitcoin, and if we're going to apply a relative framework to Bitcoin, where we say, let's just kind of let Bitcoin's purpose, let it emerge organically. Let's figure out, let's not say what it is. Let's not apply meaning to it. Let's not apply its purpose. Instead, let's say its own purpose kind of develops out of its own usage. Well, when you do that, you get into some real big problems. And yeah, you tracking with me?
I'm 100% tracking with you. No, I wanted to open something because I wanted to just read it. There's a funny thing about labeling things, right? Because when you label something, you can make a distinction about if you like it or you don't like it. Do I want that thing? Do I not want that thing? And there's this really smart dude or group of dudes or girls or whoever they were, called Satoshi Nakamoto, if you haven't heard of him. But they made this thing called Bitcoin, and they called it a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Weird, because I'm unaware of any notion of a distributed ledger in that title. Yes, I understand it is a distributed ledger. That's how it has to work. But the understanding of it, which I do understand now, like there's all these different aspects of, the blockchain being co-opted by banks and with the CBDCs and all. Yeah, I got it. But the core here was the peer-to-peer exchange of electronic cash, which was highlighted, I think, in the largest form that I've personally seen outside of like going in the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But in what Henry Ford, we've talked about this before on the pod, but what Henry Ford kind of pontificated in the early 1940s, and then also what the two gents who wrote The Sovereign Individual kind of ideated on is, hey, this form of electronic transmission of value is what is going to be kind of the next wave of everything. And I think that's the core of this debate in my mind that's missed is Peter Todd, Jameson Lopp, and Shinobi, who's not a dev, but like all in Gloria and everybody, all these devs, they are not wrong. Bitcoin is a distributed ledger. That is 100% correct. And technically, all of the things, and I mean like on a technical level, not like technically, but like from a technical perspective, all of the things that they're proposing are sound. They're good. I'm not saying they're good, but like they're good software. We'll put it that way. However, if you look at this from a moral perspective, which you have to ascribe a moral to a thing, right? Guns are inherently amoral objects. But when you use the thing for something, it ascribes a moral imperative to it, right? Like this is the whole thing about like, I failed my test and well, let's blame the pencil, right? It's like pencils are inherently amoral things. They're just an object. But what you do with that thing, the pen is mightier, that whole phrase where it comes from. Like this is where we get into this challenge with the relativism of Bitcoin Core, and kind of Gloria shooting herself in the foot, and then also Jameson shooting himself in the foot by saying what Satria is trying to do is an edge case. Well, then why'd you do it? Why now? The only why now answer you've legitimately given us is because you are being paid by these people to push this thing, push this BIP, push this change to Bitcoin. There is no objective reason to make these changes right now unless you follow the money. And so this is the issue here is, when we come back to, the whole name of this, of the moral degeneracy of Bitcoin Core, is the degeneracy is the relativism. Like they're not making solid claim. Well, let me rephrase. They actually are making a solid claim. They're making a solid claim that Bitcoin is a distributed ledger. And that is actually great that they have made that claim. But I think that is fundamentally and diametrically opposed to what Bitcoin actually is from a Bitcoin maxi perspective. It is money, period. Hard money, period. And anything that goes antithetical to that, opposite of that, should be violently ripped out of the system. Personally, that is my personal take on it. I'm brand new here, but I'm curious your take on it. You've been here a lot longer than I am, and I do not see, and I'll go back to the coin clipping. If you are trying to base a system of value that you want to base everything on, and this can go all the way back to one of the things for Thank God for Bitcoin is like, why is Bitcoin the best money from a Christian perspective? Because it is the only thing that actually finitely values anything. And from a Christian perspective, the most finitely valuable thing that you have is your time. I would argue that it's not just a Christian thing, but from a Christian perspective, that is the thing that we are told is your time is the thing that God values the most of you, because you are put here to do things for a specific purpose. And so while you are here, your time is the thing that you exchange for value. You exchange it with the time, with the money, with what you do with it, whether it be going to provide for your family, provide for your church, provide for your friends, provide for your community. And so all of that to say, and landing the plane, you cannot have a relativistic view of value. You can't. Bitcoin is either a measure of value or it is a decentralized data network. And if you want it to be a decentralized data network, we have this thing. It's called Ethereum. Go use that. And so that's kind of my take on this whole debate is if you don't understand the 50-year ramifications of making the distinction between money and ledger, and that these two things, yeah, they might be 1 degree off, right? Like it might just be like a 1 degree difference. But 50 years from now, 1 degree over 50 years, you're ending up in 2 completely different places. And I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that's missed right now is all these people are just like, oh, it's not that. It's like, it is a huge deal, which is why Luke, the mechanic, and all these other people, as they've been coined the Nazis, are being Nazis, because you can't be relative about this. You have to be ironclad, or you're going to get to where everybody else has gotten: the fall of the Roman Empire, the current fall of the U.S. dollar. Right? Like, it's really, really interesting that these people are missing it when literally they're saying, "Oh, I want to escape the system," but you're just recreating the system again.
Yeah. So I mean, tons to unpack there. I think the first thing that stood out to me was that, me personally, like, I do not like quoting the white paper, like you mentioned, like, and people will do this. It's like, okay, fine, there's some merit to it, etc. But like, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, right? That's the purpose of Bitcoin. That's what we're here, blah blah blah. But there's an issue with that, in that ultimately that just kind of ends up as an argument from authority. Like, here's the authority. I'm just appealing to this authority. I'm not like actually reasoning through the fundamental principles here. And you get to the fundamental principles, and you should get to the fundamental principles, as you did in your argument there. Also, just quoted white paper as a whole, like, just red flag from like the BSV and B cash days.
Maybe Bitcoiner here, but keep going.
Yeah. But the important thing here is getting to the root argument, getting to try and understand the fundamental, like, underlying issues, the actual logic of how these systems work, and what their purposes would do if they are defined this way versus defined that way, right? So if we say that Bitcoin is a monetary network that produces transactions, and those transactions are uncensorable transactions, and they have these particular qualities, and we want to say, okay, cool, the purpose of Bitcoin is a monetary network. Okay, let's just say that. But then, so that's one camp. And then another camp wants to say the purpose of Bitcoin is a distributed ledger, right? So as you're describing, like, these two things are nominally, they sound copacetic. They sound like they exist in unison. Like, they sound fine, right? But if it's just a ledger, it's a ledger of what? Well, it's a ledger of data, and all the data is it's all just data. So it doesn't really matter. Like, the purpose is the ledger, right? Versus the monetary network. No, the purpose is the money. Okay, so then these two things are different. And like you said, they're only 1 degree different. But if you look long term, you're going to have to start making choices about the direction of development. You're going to have to start making choices about how, like, what software we want to run versus what software we don't want to run. Like, we're going to have to start making choices about all these things, because at some point you're going to have to say, well, if it's just a ledger, the only thing that matters, because it's a ledger, is having the ledger for the most amount of ledger space, if you will, right? Like, we just need to expand the ledger space because we're just keeping track of everything. It's all about keeping track. It's all about keeping track. And, it doesn't really matter that we have a block size limit anymore, because it doesn't matter that we have a limit at all. It doesn't, like, the whole purpose of it is to just keep a ledger, if that's the purpose of Bitcoin. But if the purpose of Bitcoin is money, well, it really starts to matter a lot that the block size stays small, and that it's a distributed network, and all these other features start to matter a lot. Because if it's money, then the purpose of the money is to, like, we don't want to have anybody take over the money. Like, we can't have anybody control the money. No one gets to be the money printer if the purpose of Bitcoin is money, right? Because if everybody's the money printer, it doesn't matter anymore. It's just whatever. But if the purpose is money, then it really does matter that then the number of nodes expands over time, that the network gets more decentralized over time. But if the purpose is a ledger, then it doesn't really matter that the number of nodes expands over time. And honestly, it's just going to be easier if the nodes contract, because then we'll have more ability to add more space and more content to the nodes, right? So these, at what at first seem like very, hey, these work together. Like these can totally be fine working together. At first they seem that way. But the second you start to actually look at this long term and try and reason through the actual implications of making these choices about teleology, you start to see the problems. And that's what we're seeing now. Now, connecting it back to the relativistic versus absolute frameworks, well, if you ideologically, if you're just like, oh, that's good for you, whatever, like if you want to have cat pictures on there, it's not my choice to, it's not my, I'm not going to tell you that's the wrong thing to do. Well, that assumes a particular teleology about the network. That assumes about a particular teleology about the person you're interacting with, right? Like you have to assume that they believe relativism is also the way to go here as well. And it's just, oh man, it's so self-undermining.
I think what's interesting about the cat picture thing, right? And again, this goes back to the point, is no one would like to see Bitcoin fail more than Wall Street. Period. They are the largest competitor.
They'll never tell you that, but that's true.
They'll never tell you that. And actually, yeah, that's a lie. They will tell you that. I've had people that I know who used to be on the street, like tell me straight up, right? Because if Bitcoin succeeds, then that means they were morally repugnant, right? Because if you are literally just a thief, that's what you are. If you are on Wall Street, you're literally just a thief. Like, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude about that, but there's nothing. Wall Street is just legalized gambling. That's it. That's all it is. Just like legalized gambling. The same thing with the Fed. It's just a way to keep the Ponzi going. And this is the issue, is we've tried this, there's nothing. Bitcoin is the first new thing that I would say, it's not even new, right? Because like the Yop stones, right? Like Yop stones were a thing and they were really hard to manufacture and there was kind of like a finite nature of them, but then somebody came in and they broke it. And I think honestly, like the Yop is probably the best corollary of what's going on right now. Is as soon as, and I can't remember who the English guy was who came in and like brought in the same limestone that was happening in Yop. But it's like, but that's literally they had a essentially fixed inflation because it took so long for these new stones to be developed. And then somebody came in and innovated and completely changed the point of their money system, which was like, oh, hey, I'm just going to come in and like add a bunch more value to it. I think that's the thing that we're at kind of this inflection point of getting to, is if you're not understanding this, the intelligence of the Bitcoin core devs is not in question. Like they are all very, very smart. However, you can be really smart and be morally bankrupt. And I think that's the issue that we're seeing in a lot of avenues with the core folks is, just because you're making, like, the problem is how you're playing the game. And if the point of the game is just to see number go up in terms of like your individual monetary like bank account, you're going to bend the rules to make that happen. But if the point of the game is to protect everyone in the world from monetary degeneracy, that was what we're currently feeling, that's a very different game you're playing. And I think that is the difference between these two games. Like the game that Jameson Lopp is playing is bankrupt of all moral foundation. It is completely based on what is going to be the best technical thing to do for all of these companies that I'm invested in or that I am investing in, and what is going to give them the greatest advantage in the future. That is the game that he's playing. I'm not here to say that that game is right or wrong for him, but I think from a societal perspective, it is incorrect, because you cannot help the most number of people if you make things too complicated. Period. From my personal vantage point, you cannot, going back to the gravity example, you cannot ignore gravity and tell people that you're helping them. You can't.
Yeah.
You have to. I heard, actually, it was interesting. I was listening to Bitcoin today, and somebody was talking about things will go up slowly, but they can come down quickly. And it made me think about, and he was using Beyond Meat as an example, but it made me think about redwood trees, right? Bitcoin right now is a redwood tree. Redwood trees, if you're not familiar, are these trees that can be like 20 or 50 feet in diameter or radius, right? And so these are giant trees that are hundreds, thousands of feet tall. They grew to be that tall over like 6 or 7 or 8,000 years, right? But it was a slow growth to get them to that point. But then you can cut down a redwood tree in a couple days, right? And as soon as it's down, it's done. And I think that's the thing that people are missing right now about Bitcoin is these decisions we're making are about the soil the redwood tree of Bitcoin is inside of. And are you going to give it a pot that, has all these people attaching all these freaking billboards and this other baloney on top of it? Or are you going to literally just leave it alone? And I guess you can't leave it alone, but like, are you going to foster and nurture the single most important aspect of it, which is the monetary aspect, in my opinion, because that is what is going to turn it into a tower of something that's useful for all of society versus something that's just going to continue to do what the Fed does, which is useful to a few and make Bitcoin have its own Cantillon effect.
Yeah. There's another pattern that I'm seeing that you kind of touch on in that is if you take, as I was describing earlier, if you take the anarcho agorist libertarian kind of perspective, you're inclined to reject the state, right? But a lot of people will then take that too far and they'll reject all systems of authority, including all moral systems, right? So they'll look at the Bible and they'll be like, it's just trying to oppress me. Get that out of here, right? But then they're left with a few choices about how, like, so they basically reject, like they take it too far and they reject all transcendent sources of morality. But that has some problems, right? And those problems are going to be one, if you reject all transcendent sources of morality, well, then the only sense of morality you can have is from the state, which has the most ability to do the most violence, which would then force you to adopt whatever their moral structure is, right? Like you can reject the state, but you're kind of just relying on their moral structure to tell you what is and is not morally valid, right? So this is part of the reason why I think that the CSAM like issue is so contentious, is because the people who get their morality from a transcendent source will use CSAM as an example of why we should be banning arbitrary data. But then the anarcho-libertarian types will reject the transcendent source of authority that says this is bad, and they'll just replace it with the state, and they'll say, you're just apologizing for the state because they don't have any transcendent framework that says CSAM is bad. They can only have the state. Now, this is one perspective. Another perspective is the one we've already harped on, which is the relativistic, oh, that's good for you, blah, 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 and that has its own problems. But then the third perspective, which I think is what you're trying to get at after here, which is there's a really good word for it that I don't remember, but it basically has to do with elevating the ethics that are in engineering to human scale, not engineering scale. And so that's when you run into the problems of the precautionary principles, with the famous quote being, we got from Jurassic Park, our scientists got so enamored with whether or not they could do the thing, they forgot to ask the question of whether or not they should do the thing, right?
Yeah, it's that Elon video that's going around where it's just like, the greatest mistake that engineers make is they optimize something that shouldn't have existed in the first place.
That's part of it, yeah. But it has to do with essentially throwing precautionary principles to the wind, just failing to ask, should we do this, right? Like, and as an engineer, like I can speak to this. Like I know it's like there's solutions to problems that are like, wow, if we could just really just do this, it would just make the whole system so much more beautiful, right? But beautiful according to who? Like beautiful according to what standard? Beautiful according to like, yeah, if we do that, it's going to cost this problem. And I can kind of see that happening with the op return default size change, because they're saying it's ugly to have this set as this arbitrary number. Where's this number come from? It has no, it's no, like, it doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't connect to the code. It doesn't connect to reality. It's just arbitrary. It's just there for no reason. Nobody can justify it. But it would be very nice and very elegant if we could set the default to another default, which is the block size. But first you have to ask, should we do that? And the answer, of course, is no, because then you're just you're putting together another pathway for arbitrary data. But there's another knock-on effect, which is now we're tying the amount of relay to the block size. And as we discussed earlier, if the purpose of Bitcoin is just a distributed ledger, or the purpose of Bitcoin is arbitrary data storage, or its emergent purposes, or whatever it is, well, all of a sudden we have another, there's enough pressure on the block size as it is, as we've seen historically, and as we see constantly with regard to whether or not your transaction is going to get into the block, into the next block. But now if we change this default to be in direct reference to the block size, and if we just remove the filter entirely and just have at it whatever, we're again putting more pressure on this other variable, this other constant. And you can already see the thought process, because, oh, well, we let this go. Well, but then why do we have a block size? Why not increase the block size? When you're putting pressure on the block size, you're arguing for the block size to increase. So this is like, you guys, you're literally tying op return size to the block size. That is literally just for the purpose of centralizing the network. Like, that is the end result of that change. And then they jump through the whole rigmarole of blah 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 blah, and you're like, oh man.
I think,
sorry, that's not a steel man of their argument. That's just me connecting that dot right now. But
Promethean gap, by the way, is the term you're looking for.
Okay. For what?
So for the thing you're talking about, so the term you're likely referring to is the Promethean gap, a philosophical concept from the 20th century thinker Gunther Anders. It describes the widening divide between humanity's growing technological and engineering capability, what we can achieve, and our limited moral, emotional, and imaginative capacity to fully grasp or responsibly handle the consequences, what we should do.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is a perfect example of like why I think what Elon doing is what Elon is doing with trying to get us to Mars is actually the most interestingly Christian thing we can do. And here's how I'll describe that is, or kind of unpack that. But like, God created, and again, I'm coming from a Christian perspective, right? So you can immediately turn me off. But I firmly believe we were created to be creators and explorers, because if we believe we're in the image of God, which I do believe, the whole point of everything is just to kind of create and explore in an effort to serve and love your God. Like that, the last piece is the most important part. But I think, in the whole part of Genesis, I was like, I created this stuff and I saw that it was good. I think God would want us to go and explore all these amazing and wonderful good things that he's created. And he would want us to figure out a way. It's like, if he's going to create a people and create a people in a universe that has finite properties to it, it probably would bring him a lot of joy to know that the people that he created have found a way to thrive and survive for even longer than, they might normally have been around if the sun that he created to keep them warm exploded. So it's like, in my mind, I think there's like an interesting thought process there about like what would make God smile. And I think just there's so many things about life that are just so funny. It's like you see God show up in ways just like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. You knew I shouldn't have done that, and I did that. It's like, or I should have done that. Like I should have absolutely done that. And so I think this comes back to the Promethean gap, though, of what we can achieve versus what we should do is, from a Bitcoin perspective, like, and coming back to core, like. Adam Back posted today that both sides think what they're doing is right, and I don't think he's wrong there. I don't think there are people at core who are wantonly trying to, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here, but wantonly trying to destroy Bitcoin. But it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The problem is it's the same thing with the debate about gay marriage, right? Is they're like, oh, it's not like we're going to try to transition your kids, which was the moral argument back in like the early 90s when they were kind of doing this whole push towards, gay marriage and all that other stuff. Is like, well, now what are you trying to do? You're trying to transition our kids forcibly. And if you live in the state of California, if your kids are transitioning, we can legally hide that from you as a parent. Period. Full stop. That is happening. And so this, I think, is the big challenge, is exactly what you're talking about, is if you're pushing up against something, you can only have one goal there, and that's to change it. Because if you didn't want to change it, you would be trying to buttress it. It's very different. It's literally the whole thing of what Luke is trying to do. Is Luke is trying to buttress the belief, understanding, and idea around Bitcoin being exclusively money. And I think that's the point. That's what we should be doing. Like, personally, that is what we should be doing. Why? Because my kids don't need freaking dick butt pictures. They need a hard asset that cannot be futzed with by any central government, and decentralization in every way, shape, and form at all cost, in my mind, is the thing. And your dick butt JPEG is the cost, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. There's what part of this have we, in terms of the moral structure? I mean, we've talked about the ethics, like the big picture ethics about where we get our ethics from, and then the relativism, engineering ethics. Then there's also the, I mean, call it ethics, but if you have a purpose that's at cross purposes, we haven't really talked about that, but if you have a purpose that's at cross purposes and you optimize for one purpose, you will be destroying the other purpose. Or if you optimize for one purpose, the other purpose, you'll be destroying the former purpose. And you can't have these things in parallel. So like, you have access to some of the more inside conversations. Are there other moral arguments that are talked about or coming out with regard to this whole debate? Or is that those are kind of the big ones?
I think those are kind of the big ones. I think, though, what you just talked about, though, is, and kind of what the image that came to mind when you were kind of making that last point is, I think we legitimately have to think about these two ideas of Bitcoin as twins. And
oh yeah, I remember another one now. Go on.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's like these are twins that are, because like Bitcoin is still incubating, in my opinion, or and there's, I think there's the case to ossify or not ossify, and I think that's bigger than this. But there are moments, right, where you have to make a decision to save one child because there's not enough whatever. And so I think that's kind of where we're at, is we're at this decision point where we have to make a decision to save one of the ideas, one of for lack of a better word, the chains, whether it be the money chain or whether it be the database chain, right? And I think that's one of the things that everyone can kind of look at, and if you really are trying to make a call, is I would say the simplest argument is there is a good case to be made to save the money chain, even if you are at Bitcoin core and you are on the side of the database, because there are other database chains that exist. Period. I firmly believe if you actually think that a call must be made to look at, because like that's what they're saying right now. They keep telling all the Nazi people to fork, like, I'll just fork. I was like, well, honestly, if that is your logic, you actually should be on the side of Nazis, because there are other data chains that exist. And if you are a true cypherpunk from a perspective of like, we want like cypherpunks to write code, or we want to be against the system, well, then you must go against the system, which is a group of corporations that already have a bunch of data chains, a bunch of data chains already exist. You have Ethereum, you have Solana, you have, take your pick. And so if you firmly believe that Bitcoin is something that can change the future, you must be on the side of the money chain. I may be off on that. What's your take though? But that's honestly like just kind of thinking about it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense to me. Again, the moral illiteracy of the whole thing is kind of mind-boggling. The other thing that comes to mind in terms of moral arguments that we like should address here is the intention argument. And it's exactly what you're talking about. If the intention, okay, we talked about purpose, and purpose informs intention. Like, here's the purpose of this thing. Because this is the purpose, we can intend that we're heading in this direction, right? And that's where you get the degree. The 1 degree turns into the huge disparate space. And you think about the intention stuff. It's like, you guys, if we are going to be running code with the purpose of arbitrary content is the intention, nobody's going to want to run the code, because they have to run the code in their house on their node. Like, and they're just like, I think Luke or somebody was talking about it today. It's like, no. Like, yeah, Tor is awesome. Always run things through Tor because, hey, it's like super secure, blah, blah, blah. But if you're going to be an exit node, just be forewarned. Like, we don't recommend it because it's so tenuous. It's so hard to do. You get subpoenaed all the time. You have to prove all the stuff all the time. You have to set up all these different unbelievable things just to have it work and do all this other stuff. And we don't have to get into the technical details of all that, but it's like, it's hard and tenuous, right? And that's what we're signing up to do if we become an arbitrary data storage, just like Tor is an arbitrary data distribution system, right? So it becomes really tenuous. If that's the intention to do that, well, then we have to take on all of that risk and all of that liability and all of that complication and all of that, the technical difficulty of doing all that stuff. And some of it's hard, some of it's easy, of course, but it's still like, why take it on? Why, in standard security theory or standard security models, there's the idea of reducing risk, and then there's the idea of eliminating a vector of risk entirely. When you reduce risk, you're making it less likely that the risk could happen. It's putting a lock on your door, right? But how about you just remove your door entirely? Then nobody's ever going to be able to break into your door because there is no door to break into, right? And when we are adding intention or expanding intention, we are essentially doing the same thing. We're saying, we're not just going to have one door, we're going to have multiple doors. And it's like, no, this is antithetical to good sense. Call it that. So yeah, the intention thing is a huge problem. I don't know. What's your thought on the intention?
Well, before I have my thought on the intention, I'm gonna welcome to the stage. Bonus player has entered the chat.
What's up, y'all?
What up?
I've been listening live, so I'm caught up to speed with what you guys are talking about. But yeah,
what's your take? Welcoming live Anton Syme, who's joining us from I believe he's currently somewhere on Mars. I'm not quite sure. I think he was on the first SpaceX
we'll call it Mars.
Dragon ship to go to Mars. But it's great connection. The Starlink is wonderful.
Yeah, I think I'm on the other side of the planet from you guys. So 12-hour time difference.
Yep.
It's late where I am. Yeah. So I set up a guy today in a foreign country with Blue Wallet. He was on an Android phone, and I actually gifted him some Bitcoin. He's a good friend, and I felt like being generous. And so I had to walk him through the setup process of writing down seed words, and I had to tell him about 50 times, pen and paper, don't take a picture with it, don't enter it in your phone, don't show it to anybody. But how cool is that to have given someone else the knowledge? And now somebody in a foreign country is set up and is self-sovereign. It was pretty cool.
I was just at Walmart doing a return, right next to the return thing is there's another line it literally says the money line, and there's 5 people in line trying to send remittances to their family. And I just was literally listening to the Walmart person be like, so what do you want to send? And he was like, I would like to send 1,100 euro. And she's like, okay, so they're going to receive 910 euro. He's like, no, I want to send 1,100 euro. She's like, okay, they're only going to receive. And I was like, oh God, God, if you just use Bitcoin, they would literally receive 1,100 euro. It's like,
I sent it was $50 worth of Bitcoin. I forget how many sats that is right now. I didn't even look at the sats.
it's like 40.
And that was another thing I had to explain. I had to explain, this is $50 right at this moment. It's not going to be $50 in 5 minutes. I don't know what it's going to be. It could be more, it could be less. Which he totally understands. He's a very intelligent person. He completely got everything about Bitcoin immediately, but it had a fee that was equivalent to $1.12. But it was kind of cool. It was at 0 confirmation. So it had at least been received somewhere on the blockchain within like 30 seconds with a $1.12 fee, whatever that comes out to in sats. I felt like that was pretty fair.
108,000 sats, by the way.
Yeah.
I was like, I had it wrong. I wanted to.
I remember.
Oh, that's wrong. This is doing it backwards. Sorry. Keep going. Ignore me.
Bondor, I remember you giving a birthday present to a friend, and you were like, "Yeah, I just threw like 1 million sats at him. No big deal." About that now.
When do I get my birthday present?
It's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, doing it, giving stats is great. Tying it back to this conversation though is like, what if it's not just giving sats? Like Anton, I'm not going to name him now, but we have a mutual friend who for years used Bitcoin to literally keep his family alive in another nation, which I won't name the nation either, by sending them Bitcoin. And then they would sell it locally, and that's like literally how they survived because of a whole bunch of political drama that they would have otherwise been destitute on the street, etc. Right? Literally lives destroyed had it not been for our friend doing this. So when it comes to back to the moral, ethical stuff of this, it's like when we introduce these ethical and moral dilemmas and risks and the absurdity of relativism and the logical inconsistencies and incongruities and direct contradictions of purpose and telos and how we put all of that at risk. When we introduce this stuff, we put people's lives literally at risk. And man, yeah, sure, core maintainers, I'm sure they have some sense of this, right? They have some sense of like, this is a big project where the responsibility is tremendous. The implications are huge for anything we do. I'm sure they have a sense of that, right? They have to. But can anyone anywhere really have a sense of that? It's so monumentally big, right? Like you go to JD, I mean, you could probably speak to this a little bit. What kind of sense of responsibility do the people who work in banking really high up the chain, what kind of sense of responsibility do they have with regard to whatever they're responsible for? Yeah.
To themselves. That's it. The only responsibility is to themselves, period. Yeah. And they are going to play the game as hard in the paint as they can. And I think that's the issue. And I think actually that's one of the reasons why, again, like I think Luke is a very polarizing figure, but I think that's actually one of the reasons why Luke, and actually interesting, I'd say Mechanic too, have such a. I was thinking about this the other day. Is they're fighting from the high ground, and I'll use Charlie Kirk as an example of this too. If you're fighting from truth, or championing something from a perspective of truth, you are fighting from the high ground. Because if you really think about that, is you cannot stand any higher than something that's objective. Like truth is the most objective thing. And so if you're fighting from the high ground, the other side of it is if you're on the high ground, you're going to catch the most flack. That's just inherently what's going to happen because your head is above everybody else. That's not saying you're more intelligent. That's literally just saying is you're standing in a place that is set apart. And that's also, going back to the Bible, but a biblical place. So you're standing in a place that is set apart. And so it's important to understand, though, not just the fact that you are standing on higher ground, but actually you have a higher degree of responsibility when you're up there. Because if you lead people astray, and this is again biblical, like you are going to be judged for that. And so I think that's the other thing that, I would say Luke and a lot of these other guys kind of have internalized is, I think people give Christians and give like the Bible verses, it is harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And the point of that verse is that you will be judged, and somebody just posted this from Mark 4. It's like you will be judged by the same measure with which you judge others. And so if you are standing on objective truth and using it as a cajole to hurt other people, that is going to come right back around and karmically whip you in the face when you are judged by God. And so I think that's landing the plane on your thing is if you look at Bitcoin as a project to be stewarded, as we were just talking about, and you look at the purpose of that stewardship being the freedom of the future, you have a completely different perspective on it than if you look at it as, I need to make my investors the most amount of money with this tool.
Yep. Anton, Anton, go.
Okay. So there are things that are necessary in life that you have to spend money on to have to survive. Like at some point you have to buy food for yourself to eat it. You have to pay for the place where you live. If you own a house, you pay property taxes, blah, blah, blah. You have to spend some money. And so you can't just endlessly hoard money, which is something that it's like an argument that I've been in with a family member who believes that Bitcoiners are essentially bad people because he sees all of the money going into Bitcoin and Bitcoin holders just being hoarders of that money. And so poor people aren't going to ever have any access to it. So as the price goes up, the people who hold Bitcoin will become the rich people, and there'll be this separation between the rich and the poor are just going to be left, and the Bitcoiners aren't going to care about them at all. So that's what he believes about it. And you were talking about bankers and who they like owe something to, and they only are thinking about themselves. I have a friend who literally owns a bank, and to him, he's a person who loves competition. He sees money as just a game, just like as if you're playing a board game with your friends. Or think about it if you're a runner. If you're a really good runner and you're running a race and you're enjoying the race because you enjoy running, you're just going to run as hard as you can and try to win the race. You don't look behind you and be like, oh, who's a slower runner or who has some sort of disability that's keeping them from running? I'm going to run back and help them. No, you're just running to win the race. And fiat money is endless, and Bitcoin is not endless. It actually is a finite amount of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin holders cannot just hoard Bitcoin if Bitcoin becomes a monetary standard, which it will. They have to spend money to survive, which is exactly what your friend was doing. And it's something that, look, we all love to hold Bitcoin. We love to pretend that we never sell any Bitcoin. But the reality is sometimes we have to. I just had to do it. I had to pay my taxes this year. And I just happened to set a limit order for the amount of taxes that I owed when the price was basically at the all-time high. So it worked out really well for me. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, that's my rant on that.
I'd love you actually, Anton, to kind of unpack kind of the Telios aspect of all this, because I think, and I'd love you to kind of buttress it too, Bondor. But I think I would kind of love your take, and actually, like, can you unpack it of like what does Telios mean, and then just kind of like explain to people why it's important in this context of the Corby Knots debate.
Are you asking me or Bondor?
You, but maybe we have Bondor tee it up and then you dive in deeper.
I could just do the large picture. Telos is the purpose. So when people talk about Telos is it gets thrown around in theology a lot, and not so much in standard conversation. Standard conversation is really just, what's the purpose of this? Like, let's define the purpose. So we have a mission, so we have a direction, right? That's what telos is. So, Anton, what is the telos of Bitcoin in your view? We JD and I have obviously hashed it out already, but
I talk about this every time that we all get together and talk about it, that there are people, I don't know if you can call them people, there are governments, there are people who are appointed by the governments who are in control of the money printer. They endlessly print the money for whatever they want. And oftentimes they are things that are directly in contrast to what you know to be moral good. And you are funding those things because that inflation is a secret tax that takes money, whether you like it or not, to fund things that maybe you disagree with. Bitcoin is free from all that because it is a finite supply. Nobody can inflate it. If you want to pay for something, you have to earn that money to then pay for that thing. And it's on you. You can't force anybody else to pay for something that they don't want to pay. So it is pure libertarian voluntarism in that sense, that you only pay for the things that you really, really want. And with a money that is limited supply, that is going up in terms of all these other currencies, you are going to want to hold on to that money, because the longer you hold on to it, generally, the more valuable it is going to become over time. So you're incentivized to have a low time preference and wait for things that are really, really valuable that you need.
I want to double click one more time on that, and have you just kind of go deeper though of the why is patience, that's probably the best way to say it, to phrase this question is, from a moral perspective, right? Would you agree that the most important moral aspect of Bitcoin is patience? I'm curious. Low time preference.
Bondor, what's your thought on that?
it's interesting. I mean, as an engineer, I tend to think like, well, the most important thing is just going to be the fundamental nature of the thing, which is to say, no inflation, right? The measure, God is a just measure, and the measure is just. It is 1 Bitcoin today equals 1 Bitcoin tomorrow. And I think that's the, call it the golden thread, or call it the foundational thing. This is the piece that connects all the other pieces. So with 1 Bitcoin today, 1 Bitcoin now equals 1 Bitcoin tomorrow at a protocol level, that's where you can even have patience from. Like, if patience is a result of that, right? If 1 Bitcoin today does not equal 1 Bitcoin tomorrow, well, then your patience gets eroded via the whole time reference loop and all the other stuff, right? But if it's 1 Bitcoin today, 1 Bitcoin tomorrow, all of a sudden you can start to build patience on top of that. And you can build all the other related virtues on top of that as well, because there's a base layer that allows you to do this, economically speaking, of course. And that's huge. Like, that's worth fighting for, right? None of this other, like, you just open up Twitter and it's just like absolute doom scrolling, like horrendous video after horrendous video, right? Just constantly. And I mean, directly related to patience, you can just, anytime there's violence, you can almost directly relate that to patience. This person didn't have the patience to deal with the conflict appropriately. They needed to settle this conflict immediately. And the way that you settle a conflict immediately is with violence, right? So it's just like, you can see, like, this connects to a lot of different things. Maybe it's not a direct connection. Maybe it's not even an indirect connection, but it's this weird cultural, societal kind of pressure that just starts pushing in a direction towards patience. And so, yeah, like, why does this matter? Why does the Bitcoin telos matter? Why does this all this matter? Well, directly affects anybody who's using this system. And when you try and pollute that with making Bitcoin into something else entirely, you're either eroding or you're diluting that purpose. You're diluting that ability for people to interact and pursue noble endeavors. And it's mind-boggling that people would want to curtail that. There exists people out there that hate human flourishing, and we're not going to name names, but we know who they are.
I think what's interesting, and I've always kind of thought about this, and I've never been able to properly articulate it, but I'll say this, and I'll kind of go from here. The Bill of Rights was originally 10 amendments and has since been expanded to 27. So they've added 17 amendments to the Bill of Rights in the 234 years, because it was written in 1791, since it was created. So the moral foundation, the moral fabric of the United States, the longest prospering nation, I would argue, that we're aware of, right? We don't know some of the other historical things that have kind of come, but like from a hockey stick style growth perspective, there's never been a more prosperous nation ever, right? And I think what's interesting is, my personal take on why we can't get this wrong is Bitcoin is the Bill of Rights for the next era of humanity. That's my personal take. For the digital age, Bitcoin is the Bill of Rights for the digital age. And if we get that wrong, we put that next generation into bondage and slavery forever. This is the only off-ramp. Like, I am unaware currently, I may be wrong, but there is no other opportunity for us to be able to break free from the Cantillon Keynesian system but Bitcoin. And so that is why the ad hominem, which has become the only attack of core on people from knots that I've seen, that really has been the underlying challenge, because at the end of the day, core is making a technical argument and knots is making a moral one. And I would argue that anything that has to deal with people must have a moral basis, period. Because if you're just going to, if Bitcoin was a purely AI phenomenon, core is right. I would posit that, because at the end of the day, the technicals need to be so sound that, whatever the AI deems as correct should be correct. But from a system that needs to coexist in a society, right? In a human world, the bedrock must be the moral foundation, period. Because the morals are how we can look at a story and know whether that story is good or bad. There are societies in this world that believe cannibalism is good, right? I would argue that that's wrong, but in that society, that is a concrete truth and that is good. And so I think that's the issue, is like, if we're trying to make a declarative Bill of Rights for the world, that's what Bitcoin is. And in my mind, that is why it is actually so important to stick firmly to the monetary aspect of it, because again, money comes back to this finite thing, or rather Bitcoin is a money that is finite, which then values your time, which is finite. And if we move to a world where, as you were talking about before, Bondor, you're pushing up against the upper limit of the block size, well, then you're going to be pushing up against the upper limit of the actual finite nature of Bitcoin. And if you blow the lid off that, we've screwed it up and it's over. And all of this was literally for naught.
So core, correct me if I'm wrong here, but core wants to improve Bitcoin to make it capable of doing more. And a lot of the people who are pushing this own companies where there's a financial incentive if Bitcoin can do more of the types of things that shitcoins can already do. Bitcoin knots, they don't want to change Bitcoin so quickly because there's risk if you change it quickly that you could do something and something could go wrong. And then there's also the moral argument that you can put JPEGs of horrible images that now live on your node, and now you're culpable for whatever this horrible thing is that you should not have in your possession. So there's a moral argument, and then there's also a moral argument against it, because basically these people who want to run core want get rich quick schemes because they've watched shitcoiners do it over and over and over again, and they want a piece of that. And so that is immoral as well. You asked if the number one value that Bitcoin instills in you is the value of patience. Yes, it kind of does. And I'll give you a reason why. And in the relation to a God who is love and who is just, and you want to live for something outside of yourself, that is a really hard thing to do. You can do that by loving people around you, people who are living. But how do you do it past the time when you're alive? You can't really. So let's say that you want to create value and then you want to pass it on to future generations. Well, in the fiat system, you can't do that because you are guaranteed that fiat money is going to lose value massively over time. So you can't even pass value on to future generations. If you have value in Bitcoin, you can, because Bitcoin is finite, and it's outside of the control of government, it's outside of the control of nations, and you actually can pass it on. So it gives you a way to live for something outside of yourself for future generations. And what does that take? It takes ultimate patience. It takes a patience that outlives your life. And as far as I know, there's nothing else that does it. Maybe if you buried gold coins in the ground and like gave a treasure map to future generations or something like that. That's the only thing that I can even think of to relate to it, because everything else degrades by entropy. Entropy? Is that the thing? Yeah. So yeah, we've been given this gift in Bitcoin that we can pass value to future generations, and we have to be so patient that we're willing to let the value outlive us. And Bitcoin allows that.
Indeed. Well said. We should probably start wrapping it up. One of the last thoughts I have coming off of what you just said is that so much of the impatience, so much of the relativism, so much of the literal elevating engineering beyond its station, like so much of the issues we've talked about today come from, not directly of course, but they're incentivized by fiat money just being able to print and buy whatever it wants, whatever version of reality it wants. Fiat by decree. We're going to just define reality like this or like this, and you guys just going to have to stomach it, just take it, right? Relativism, yeah, it doesn't make any kind of logical sense. It literally self-contradicts itself with just trying to state it. You have to state a contradiction. But you just have to eat that, because we could just buy reality and tell you this is the case. So much of the problems that Bitcoin faces are just legacy problems from the fiat world, which is like, those are exactly the kind of problems you want to face, because we have a system that is outside of the legacy world. We actually have a system that can now, from its own bootstraps, fund a actual version of reality that's connected to reality. All that to say, we're going to win, fam. It's going to be awesome.
I think on that note as well is I think there is a chance we don't win, but I think the way we win is we align around what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think that's the thing that we're kind of, it's interesting. That's where we're at in the Bitcoin debate now, is what is it, right? That is this whole thing of knots versus core, is what is Bitcoin? Is it a distributed ledger or is it money? And I'm actually really glad that this debate is happening now, because I do think money will win out. because it's going to be the bedrock in the same way the Bill of Rights has become this bastion of hope for so many people, right? Like there is nobody I am aware of trying to fight their way into North Korea because of the Constitution of North Korea. I know of 0 people that I can think of that are clamoring to move themselves into a communist dictatorship because of the life they will live there. They're coming to this place because of the hope instilled with them by a document, the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, that they get for coming and agreeing with the moral foundation of all men are created equal and you can prosper. And so I think that is kind of what the rallying cry of Bitcoin will become for this next generation in the digital age. And so for me, I'm excited that, it's the one-way door, in my opinion. Bitcoin will, I think, lead a lot of people to, I'm hoping it leads them to God, right? But I think it will lead them to an understanding that you cannot be morally degenerate, morally relative, because truth actually matters.
Very well put. All right, guys.
Appreciate everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, wrong button.
Thanks for tuning in to Better by Bitcoin. Bitcoin makes everything better. Like, subscribe, and follow us on X at BetterBYBTC, YouTube at BetterBYBitcoin. Not financial advice, mathematical certainty.